In our first lesson on selections and how to make effective selections, we're going to talk about the quick selection tool and some of its pros and cons. And most of them, frankly, are pros. And I would almost always start with the quick selection tool. So let's start off. I'm going to press Command Control R on this JPEG file to open it in Camera Raw. And I want to just increase the contrast and exposure a little bit because I'm really looking at the edges here to see her versus the background. So then we'll open that into Photoshop. The quick selection tool shares the same spot as the magic wand, and some people like to use the magic wand. I would suggest for the most part, I just wouldn't recommend using it because sometimes it can be misleading. In other words, there'll be times where you'll click with the magic wand, it'll look like it's done a great job, but then when you move to the next step, you'll find that it really didn't do such a good job after all. So the quick selection tool works really nicely. It's really an edge detection tool. So anytime you look at an image and go, well, there's a pretty good definition between her shoulder and the background, then the quick selection tool should find it pretty well. The only real option we have in the options bar is auto enhance. I would generally keep that on unless you run into a problem where it's slowing things down considerably, where every time you use the tool you're seeing a progress bar going still working on it kind of thing. Other than that, it's just the size of the brush itself. So right bracket will make the brush bigger. I would want to get a decent sized shape for my brush, and then when you start to click and drag, you'll see it's finding whatever edge it can. And it's important to note, I'm not doing anything. I'm not holding down any keys or anything like that to try and make it better. I'm just continually dragging, and each time I do, it's looking to try and find whatever edges it can. And you'll notice that on something with very defined edge like shoulders and everything else, it's going to do a really good job. Where it gets to her hair, then it doesn't quite know what to do. And here, you'll notice what happened is when I start to drag on her hair, it went into the background as well. So this is where we need to be able to fine-tune our selection by adjusting it. So here what's happened is it's selected too much. So I hold down the Option or Alt key, and then I can go back over this area and say, I don't really want you to select this color. And now as I do that, you'll see it's got a better job. It's still missing some pieces, but what you have to go into thinking about is ending up with a really good selection. So at this point, it's not a good selection yet. We're going to have to refine it and make it a little better. But let's look at another example. We'll open this one in RAW, and again, I would just adjust the exposure a little bit so I can see what I'm doing. Zoom in a little bit, and here, same kind of idea. I'm barely moving my mouse, and what's happening is it's finding the definite edges. So things like her jacket and her pants and her shoes and even her hair, it'll do an okay job. Now I wouldn't make kind of final judgments on this without looking at it a whole lot closer, so I could zoom in a little closer and see, okay, it got a little too much there. So once again, Option or Alt. Here I want to get a little closer, and it's missed a few hairs here and there, but overall I'm quite happy with that. And that's really what I think you want to consider doing with the quick selection tool, is kind of like the name suggests, do it quickly and get pretty accurate. And then in the next step, we'll be able to go in and refine that edge. Now, it is also possible, let's just deselect that, in some situations, you might find it easier to use the quick selection tool kind of the other way around and say, let's try and select the background first. Now, in this case, it's got a little too much of her. It's not stopping at her shoulder. So once again, I hold down Option or Alt to kind of take away from that. And then once you feel like you're getting pretty close, then you can just choose to select the inverse, which has the keyboard shortcut Command-Shift-I or Control-Shift-I. Now we're back to having just her selected, and once again I can continue to fine-tune that. So the approach you take doesn't really matter as long as you're ending up with a really good selection. I'm going to keep saying that because that's, to me, is really the key. You want to end up with a really good selection. Clearly in our case here, we're not finished yet, but before we go on to refine edge, I want to throw out another idea to you in the next lesson, which is very, very important.